Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to our Skillsoft Leader Camp, Thriving in Anxious Times. Manage your anxiety and learn to love your work again. I am Shannon Lutke, Senior Manager of Leadership Content at Skillsoft, and I'm delighted to kick off this Leader Camp, the second in a 2-day series around overcoming burnout and thriving in turbulent times. Today's session will focus on helping us better learn how to manage our anxiety and leverage it in order to be better colleagues and leaders. When managed appropriately, our anxiety will enable us to be more productive, creative, and to work through the challenges we face. We have designed this Leader Camp to be a fully interactive and immersive experience. We do this by enabling the chat pod and Q&A functionality here in our virtual classroom. First, the chat. Please make sure that your chat function is set up for all panelists and all participants and join our global conversation. Now, if the chat flow thread becomes too distracting for you, we suggest you click on the chat icon at the bottom. In the chat box, locate the ellipsis on the right and select the option Merge to Meeting window. This option will permanently pin the chat to the right of the screen, eliminating any distracting pop-ups. If you have any technical questions or questions for our speaker directly, please send those to our team of facilitators via the Q&A functionality so that we can be as responsive to your requests as possible. Please note that this Leader Camp is pre-approved for professional credit for both HRCI and SHRM's recertification programs. For more information, please send a message to us through Q&A as well. Now, I am delighted to introduce our speaker for today. Maura Ahrens-Mealy is the founder of the award-winning social impact agency, Women Online, and its database of women influencers, the Mission List. An extremely anxious introvert herself, Maura hosts the Anxious Achiever podcast for HBR Presents from Harvard Business Review. The show is a 2020 Webby Awards honoree in business podcasts and is a top 10 management podcast on Apple. Until 2018, Maura was the host of the popular podcast, Hiding in the Bathroom. Her best-selling book, Hiding in the Bathroom, How to Get Out of There When You'd Rather Stay Home, was published by HarperCollins and is available in many languages. A prolific freelance writer, she has written for Harvard Business Review, the New York Times, Entrepreneur, Fast Company, Slate, InStyle, the Oprah Magazine, the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, and The Guardian. Maura has degrees from the Harvard Kennedy School and Brown University and holds a certificate in government from the London School of Economics. Maura, as I hand the mic over to you, I would like to let our participants know that you will present for about 40 to 45 minutes, and then you and I, along with our esteemed facilitator, Nancy Santacesaria, will have a live Q&A session. So please send us your questions and we will be sure to address as many as possible. Thank you, and Maura, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Shannon. It's great to be here with you on this beautiful spring morning where I am in Boston. I want you actually to take a minute and turn off your screens if you want. I want you to stretch your neck and, I don't know, move around, loosen up, and sit back, try to get comfortable. And I'm going to tell you a story, and then we're going to talk about thriving through anxiety. So my daughter, who's now 6, loved her days at preschool. And she's introverted like me, so playing with big groups of kids was never her thing. She loved independent play. But the one time of day that she cherished and loved to come together with everyone was rug time, or meeting, as her class called it. And my daughter Josephine knew all the rituals, you know, the hello song, how to take your place on the rug, how to check the weather outside, and she took it really seriously. And then when COVID hit last year, school closed, preschool closed, and the teachers moved meeting to Zoom. And they really tried their best. And when it started, I would log on with my daughter and we'd sit there and we'd sing the hello song. But the thing is, my daughter was having none of it. She would not do Zoom meeting, and she would just walk away, leaving me staring at a screen full of 5-year-olds. And the thing is, I couldn't blame her at all for not wanting to do these Zoom calls. She did what most of us, I think, want to do. She didn't want to be on camera, and she logged off because she's 5. Fair enough. She's 5. We're adults. We can't do what we want. This is the real world, right? But what would happen if we did what we wanted to do and listened to our bodies and our feelings? Not all the time, right? But like more than we usually do, as often as we could. Would we be better leaders, better employees, better parents, partners, friends, siblings? Probably. Would we be happier at work? Definitely. And I think it's fair to say at this point, over a year in, that no matter what your pandemic experience has been, you've changed. You're not the same person that you were. You're not the same worker that you were. Take a minute and think about it while your screen is off. Close your eyes and ask yourself, do I, as a result of this year, have a better understanding of myself and what I want? What can I absolutely not stand one more minute of doing during my workday? I want today to be a day, an hour, that you can turn off your inner editor and your grown-up voice and feel free to imagine, channel your inner preschooler, because it's really important that we dive deep and reflect and feel these feelings now, identify them, notice them, so that we can advocate for ourselves and negotiate for what we want when the real world opens back up again, which it's slowly starting to do. Okay, so you can turn your screens back on if you want. If you want to keep them off, I won't be offended. Take your time. So how did we get here? How did we get to this place right now where I think it's fair to say most of us feel done, sad, numb? We had to move so quickly a year ago into an entirely new way of working. Most of us slapped the same old structure onto an entirely new work environment. And guess what? Remote work, as we're doing it now, is hard. It's draining for most of us, and it's new. And of course, we didn't have time to put it together with care or thought. For some of us, it literally happened overnight. And then, of course, 2020, 2021, this time has created tremendous anxiety. We've grieved. All of us have grieved. We've lost so much. Our nervous systems are overstimulated, overtaxed. Our boundaries have been trampled on. Most of us have no separation between home and work, and we don't feel in control. And the world is scary. Anxiety is everywhere. And how could it not be? Anxiety is a fear of what might happen in the future. And that future might be 50 years from now. Will I have enough to retire on, or will I be totally without resources and on the streets? Or it could be 5 seconds from now. Is my dog going to bark and I'm going to get stressed out in the middle of this speech? And of course, anxiety is a stress response. And the thing is, anxiety is not a bad thing. We need it. We need some of it. As the psychologist and anxiety godfather, Dr. David Barlow, said, and you heard a little bit of this if you tuned in yesterday to Dr. Ellen Hendrickson, without anxiety, little would be accomplished, right? We wouldn't have great athletes and great entertainers and artisans and students, and the world wouldn't happen because anxiety fuels us. It's our body's way of saying, get going. Creativity would diminish, crops might not be planted, Barlow says. Anxiety helps us react quickly in the face of danger, and it can make us more resourceful, more productive, and more creative. But left unchecked, persistent anxiety, the kind of anxiety that many of us have been through and are feeling right now, distracts us and zaps our energy and drives us to make poor decisions. And it can lead to burnout. I'm sure many of you have felt burnt out in the past year. The statistics that I'm seeing about burnout and well-being being extremely negative are overwhelming. How did you get there? How did you get here? You may have been, like me, extremely anxious even before the pandemic. When on a good day, you might be anxious. How did we get here? My dear friend, psychologist Rebecca Harley, who runs a center at Mass General Hospital, tells me that the people who come into her private practice often have just one question in that first meeting, which is, how the bleep did I get here? And the answer, she thinks, is that they tuned out a lot of messages. They didn't notice, they didn't listen to their bodies or to their boundaries getting trampled. And it's really hard to give yourself the permission to listen and then to make changes. But that's the key to anxiety. It's the key to sustainable leadership. And it's really the key to right now. So I'm going to ask you to make a mindset shift here and to give yourself permission to notice, to listen, and then think about changes that you can make. A common reaction to successful people like us is that we just push through. We push through stress, we push through fatigue, we push through fear. And frankly, most of us were taught this is strength, this is leadership, right? But that is succeeding in spite of your emotions. And I want you to thrive because of your emotions and how you manage them. And so this is how we start. Look, anxiety is a powerful enemy, and it's a much better partner. Notice, name, and understand. We're going to practice this a bit today. Engaging proactively with your feelings and your physical reactions, noticing them, naming them, and then understanding them gives you kind of an early warning system that your boundaries are being crossed, you're uncomfortable, something's wrong, and triggers or vulnerable areas are getting set off. I like to think of it as like the national weather system, right? As a hurricane approaches, the radar starts beeping. When you notice your feelings and you can understand your reactions to them, you can then redirect your reactions or change them to managing through. And then, of course, you can manage others and lead through these hard times, whether that's managing a team at work, managing your boss, or managing your family and your children who are also struggling right now. And you don't have to trust me on this. We have decades and decades of data on the power of emotional intelligence, which is really what this is. It's insight and understanding. People who understand their feelings are happier and they're better at their jobs. And people who understand their feelings are better at, I think, what's often called the 21st century skill set, right? Resolving conflict, bringing diverse ideas together, building resilience. All of these leadership tools that we want very badly, right, will not happen until we understand what we feel and how we react. Okay, so how? Rebecca Harley, my psychologist friend, calls it playing detective. And I love this because it feels kind of fun, you know, playing detective of your own self. So let's begin. Let's play detective. Around the beginning of the pandemic, in April, a year ago, I own a small business. So my day job is I own a marketing agency, and everyone, you know, in my field was frantically applying for PPP loans because we had lost significant chunks of our business. And, you know, we were all kind of freaking out. I called my friend Hillary, who is a principal at a similar firm, and I just checked in, you know, how's business? And she said she didn't really know because her CEO wasn't communicating with them. He had sort of disappeared. He was working really, really hard. He was doing a lot, but he was burying himself in charts and projections. And so he would reach out to get numbers from them. He was constantly consuming news about the crisis. So he was sort of jamming on his charts with CNN on in the corner. And his team felt really unsettled by this because his panic was visible, but he wasn't communicating. He was just building out business projections. What was he up to? Were the charts accurate? What was happening? Who knows? But for the CEO, this deep dive into his business projections gave him the illusion of control in an extremely uncertain time. The problem is he was making his team really anxious because he was unconsciously burying himself in his kind of calming place, charts, but he wasn't communicating with them. He was acting out his anxiety unwittingly, unconsciously, and making everyone else really anxious. So he needed to take a step back and play detective. And I'm sure any of you who've been managed by a boss can sort of relate to that story, or that may be the story of you right now. Oops. And the thing that's so powerful about noticing is that the act of noticing is itself a mindfulness meditation. It's what Viktor Frankl famously called the space in between stimulus and response. And even if you're really high on anxiety and low on time, you can build in the practice of noticing and claiming that space in between getting bad news and feeling freaked out and responding. We all react emotionally to stimuli and triggers at work, even though we like to sort of pretend like we leave that part of ourselves out the door, many of us. You know, Hillary's CEO reacted by overworking, which is, I think, what a lot of us are doing. A lot of us are dealing with our feelings that way. I certainly am. And work is such an acceptable way of dealing with feelings. It's an acceptable coping mechanism. I would argue it's probably the only socially acceptable addiction that we have, certainly in the US. And we get lots of positive reinforcement when we do it, right? And so I think a lot of us are burying ourselves in our work right now because it feels better. If you get to inbox 0 in a really scary time, at least you have that illusion of control. And it's a super common reaction to anxiety to just do more intensely. But I don't need to tell you that it's a vicious cycle. Let's talk about understanding triggers that might happen at work, and then we'll sort of look into reactions. And you can look at these and see which are your kind of all-star stimuli. I'm sure none of you are people pleasers on the call. I'm a compulsive people pleaser. And if someone I work with is angry at me or disappointed in me, and it's someone that I value and respect, I just totally lose sleep. I can't sleep. I get so anxious. And so imagine that you get a cryptic email from a person who you feel is angry at you, and you think, oh my God, they're mad at me. I let them down. They're going to quit, and I really need them on my team, or I'm going to get fired. But trying to suss out the true meaning of an email is a fool's errand. We know this. Emotional nuance is just lost in any kind of digital communication. But for me, it's a trigger, right? If I get an email off cycle or at a weird time, oh my gosh, something bad's happening, right? It's when you see your phone and the number's calling at 4 a.m. That's not good. It could be a butt dial, but the trigger happens. And I know trigger is not a great word, but it's clear. So I'm going to use it in this context because we understand it. You know, you see that name pop up in email or Slack and your stomach flips, or, you know, you feel dread and anxiety at the mere name. I think a lot of our imagined urgency in response right now, the fact that we are on an almost 24-hour response cycle on email and Slack, is driven by almost a Pavlovian system of instant feedback and urgent response to calm our anxiety around these feelings, around these triggers. And so imagine the positive change you could create for you and your whole team if you noticed this and just didn't reply urgently. There was a great study a couple of weeks ago out of UC Irvine, and they looked at emails and people responding urgently to emails. And they found that when people were stressed out and responded to emails quickly because of stress, that the email content created a lot of angry words and therefore was furthering anxiety down the chain, right? We can all think about how that happens. So let's notice for a sec. You can close your eyes, take a move back in your chair, and think about your workday and how you feel at 9 a.m., noon, 3, 6 p.m. Does your body change over the course of the day? Do you get tight in your jaw, your shoulders? For me, it's my jaw. When you receive one of these emails, do you feel it in your body? Does your jaw clench, or does your heart rate accelerate, or your stomach flip? This experience is about your body wanting to take action because your body doesn't know it's just an email. Your body thinks, uh-oh, we better run, the tiger's chasing me. So think about if you get these feelings, is there a part of your body that it goes to? If you're on a really important call and your kids are screaming, all of a sudden, do you hunch in front of your computer? That's a protective motion. I've noticed now that if I avoid my phone even for an hour and the looking down, I feel looser. My shoulders are looser. It's like an immediate benefit just from literally putting down my phone for an hour. So here's some extra credit. When you feel these triggers, how do you react? Now, we've talked about physical reacting, right? Clenching, hunching, stomach. A lot of us are reacting. You know, you've seen all the crazy statistics about alcohol sales in the US being through the roof. But we react in so many different ways, right? How often are you relying right now when you're feeling triggered on a drink or a drug or a muscle relaxant or just over-the-counter pain relief? Are you taking more Advil than you did a year ago? Do you kind of just try to power through and ignore? Are there a couple of these coping mechanisms that are your favorites? It's funny, I was thinking about the triggering email, and I think there's two really common responses, right? Imagine that you get an email that makes you feel really anxious. So do you shut your laptop and go get a cup of coffee and pretend the email's not there? My husband has an amazing ability to do this, and I'm kind of envious of it because I'm not this person, but he'll just be like, it doesn't exist. I'll deal with it later. So that's avoidance. I'm the kind of person, if I get that email, I drop everything, I cancel my meetings, and I spend, an hour, half an hour, like writing the perfect response because I'm terrified, right? So I'm catastrophizing, I'm being a little impulsive, and I'm being a perfectionist as well. If you can build some other ways of reacting, maybe some more mentally healthy ways, calling off the fire drill that occurs when you get that email or that Slack notification, it might alleviate your anxiety. So think about the effects that common reactions have, that your reactions have, and think about, do they alleviate your anxiety, exacerbate it, do nothing? Reactions aren't always negative. You might exercise, right? A lot of us are going out for those hard runs. When I'm anxious, I cook and freeze meals. I cook giant vats of food, and my freezer is really full right now, but that's great. So think about if any of these apply. And think about how it would feel if you called off the mental fire drill and took a moment to think, oh, wow, that email really set me off. Okay, so now I'm going to move into some actions, and everything that I'm going to talk about from here on involves examining some sort of boundary and then setting a limit. And, this slide is some common, I think, boundary crossers that you could set limits on, that we're all sort of encountering mixed with overwork during the pandemic. But first, I just want to talk about Zoom. God bless Zoom. It's helped a lot of us. But where do I start with Zoom these days? Right now I'm performing for you. I'm putting out energy because this is my job and I'm loving it. But the truth is that every time you're talking on Zoom, you're performing and you're giving out a lot of energy. And, I've studied successful introverts for many, many years and interviewed many, many really powerful introverts. And the thing about being an introvert is that you have to manage your energy. You could give a great performance for an hour, but then you're depleted. You need to relax. You need to rest and not do 8 more Zoom calls. And I think all of us are a little bit like the introvert with too many engagements right now. We are just going from Zoom call to Zoom call to Zoom call, and we're performing all day long, and it is exhausting. But the good news is you could do less Zoom. There is no rule that equates remote work with Zoom. They are not equal, right? Remote work does not equal video conferencing. And I encourage you, if you're feeling triggered and exhausted, to just shut the camera off. Do a phone call. You'll actually absorb more because you won't be in anxiety. A lot of us feel like our cameras are coming into very intimate places. This is our home. I don't necessarily want my boss in my bedroom on camera. That's okay. The other thing I wanted to say is there's a lot of language that we're using. This is a little bit of an aside, but I think it's powerful in that I notice when I log on to calls and my camera's off or someone else's camera's off, people are tempted. They're like, oh, I don't think your camera's on, or is your camera not working, or what are you doing? Are you at a soccer game? It's sludging, right? It's that little negative passive aggressive talk. And it's really triggering anxiety in someone who feels like Zoom and being on camera is difficult. And so think about the language that you're using. The punchline is this: if you're feeling trapped, distracted, and anxious from your home work routine right now, you've got to reclaim your boundaries and think about managing your energy. And I know it's easier said than done. It's not just Zoom. Our whole lives have been turned upside down. So let's talk about some ways that you can think about to make it feel better and stop going into the triggers all day. And I frame it like this: putting limits around your pace, place, and space. And we'll talk about that. But let's look at a classic example. So if too many Zoom calls are triggering you, they're making you anxious, they're, oh my gosh, my house is messy, my kids are yelling, I look terrible, put a limit and limit your video calls, right? Because it's crossing a boundary, it's invading your personal space, it's zapping your energy. You don't need to explain it, it's okay. And then think about the structure, right? Think about your pace, place, and space. Can I have more audio calls? If I have a really video heavy day, can I bookmark the day with some alone time, right? And just be rigorous. Okay, so pace, place, and space. Pacing is something that I think all of us have actually been experimenting with in this great remote work experiment this past year. And I like to think of pace as being about the structure of your days. I think a lot of us, while we've been remote, might have been mixing up the pace, because certainly if you'd been going into an office all these years, you had your ritual and your routine, and now you may be able to steal an hour in the middle of the day to go to the grocery store, or you're going jogging, and then maybe you're working at different times. So how have your days shifted while you've been at home? You know, I've been working at home since 2006. And when I first started, I really thought, how am I felt like I was getting away with something, you know, because I had been in office jobs for so many years. And I kept looking over my shoulder thinking, when are they going to catch me? You know, like I'm managing the pace of my days here. But I think that this is going to be a learning, a really good learning actually from the pandemic that we can take forward. And I just encourage you to think about it. You know, what works well for you? Are you the kind of person who wants to sit down between 9 and 5, get everything done, and then log off and you feel great? Your evenings are your own. Awesome. Do you want to work in a really intense short burst, you know, and then take some downtime? It's all about thinking, what are the boundaries that I want to put in place in terms of my day? Do those late night emails just set me off? And then I want to pack it all, you know, earlier in the day so I'm not as prone to getting late night emails, or I want to set some limits down. It's really about managing the interactions that tax your energy, right? Versus those that recharge you. And this is familiar stuff. You've heard it all before, but now is an amazing time to revisit the pace of your day and what will keep you in a better place, and think about how you can move that forward. So let's talk about place. This brings me to ritual and routine. There's been a lot of discussion, and I think rightly so, about looking at the old rituals of work and how we kind of miss them a little bit. I don't think any of us miss traffic and commuting necessarily, but a lot of us miss getting a cup of coffee, or, you know, taking a walk, or going to the gym, or seeing our work friends. Our routine and our rituals have been disrupted. And when my daughter refused to do her meeting Zoom calls, that's what she was saying. She was like, I love my rug ritual, but I do not want to take this onto Zoom. And I think a lot of us feel that way, frankly, you know. Podcast listening of news podcasts and business podcasts is way down because people listen to podcasts on their commute. And as a podcast host, that's a real bummer for me. But I get it, right? That's sort of been removed. And we're having a lot of nano transitions. I just learned this is the technical term for you're literally doing work at your computer, but in 2 seconds, your kid upstairs has to log on to math. So within a minute, you are going from being, you know, VP of sales to third grade teacher, right? That's a nano transition, and it's extremely taxing on us. You didn't have to probably do that before. Your family's in the next room, your neighbor's upstairs, and you have very little control over your place, which is really about your ritual. So what do you do when your routine is really disrupted? I think that we have to realize what interruptions we can live with and which ones are making us really anxious. It's really hard right now to preserve our place and our ritual. But there are little things we can do, you know. This is actually brain science. I have a scented candle. It's an orange candle. And I've trained my brain that if I light that candle, I am writing. And that is a way that I can set place, even though my kids are literally screaming upstairs. So it doesn't solve everything, but really take a minute and think about how you can reset ritual working with what you've got. Space is it's a little more existential, but you know the feeling when your brain is just on overdrive and your consciousness is just a running to-do list. You can't stop to actually think about anything because it's the to-do list clicking on a loop. And you can't really get a clear thought in. You can't do deep work because a million things are rushing in all the time. You get flooded. That's the psychology term. Sometimes I feel so flooded with all my to-dos between home life and work life that my hands tremble and my heart races and I feel like I'm having a panic attack. And the limit to set here is literally giving yourself some space to breathe. And that's hard, but it may be setting a fake out of office. I've become the queen of the fake out of office. I invent things just for a couple hours so I can literally just get the space to breathe. Because you need to do quiet things. On my podcast, I interviewed the psychologist Alice Boyes a couple times, and she changed my life because she suggested setting concrete limits around the amount of time that I spend on the tasks that are making me feel incredibly anxious and creating that running loop. And these shortcuts and hacks are called heuristics. And how could you come up with some heuristics to set boundaries on your work and home to-do list and create that space, right? You could prioritize items and write them out so you don't get distracted by a screen and only do the top 3. You could put on an out of office at a certain time every day so you don't feel like you have to check email because people won't be upset at you if you don't answer. If you have a task, you know, like if I have a speech to write, I used to get very preoccupied and try to give every waking hour I could to the speech until it was done. But now, thanks to Alice, I say, well, you know, this is 10 hours of time. And when I'm done with the 10 hours, that's my heuristic. It's done. So think about that. I think also alone time is really important. And that's not just because I'm an introvert who has social anxiety. It's okay to be alone and it's okay to tell your kids to go away. I swear. It's okay to tell your spouse to go away too, and your dog. I mean, I always joke, you know, like I'm a fancy, accomplished professional, but at the end of the day, I want someone to come and pat me on the shoulder and say, you did a good job, you're done. But no one's saying that. No one's going to say that. And so it's really about learning to give yourself that permission and take the space. Finally, I want to touch on time. You know, there's a really solid body of management research that shows when we take our time seriously, our time management disposition, meaning how we allocate and we value our time, we have better mental health. That's not surprising. But again, so many of us just trample on our own boundaries and don't value our own time. You know, pretend you're a high-priced lawyer and you're charging $950 an hour for that time. You know, set some limits. And this is me not taking my own advice because I'm the worst. Let's look forward just as we close here. Speaking of taking your time seriously, think about what's been good this year about your work days. What surprised you? What's something that you've liked and you don't want to give up? You know, a friend said to me the other day that they really loved being able to eat lunch and read the newspaper, and sometimes their spouse would join them at the kitchen table. Maybe it's not commuting, maybe it's working out during the day. You know, these are really important boundaries and limits too. And I think that now is a great time to ask yourself, what do I want? What do I really want? What's one thing I've learned during this pandemic time that I'm going to bring back with me, even if I'm going back to the office? And what's a boundary that's been being crossed for years that makes me really anxious and really affects me during the workday, and I don't want to do it anymore? Now's the time, and again, it's about making space. Finally, I just want to shift outward a little bit to think about managing team, because of course we all work with other people, whether we're managers or not. Managing remote teams is hard. Managing people who are anxious is really hard, whether you are anxious yourself or not. It's difficult for us to get in touch with what we want. How can we possibly know what our teams want right now? But I want us all to give ourselves a pat on the back, because I would guarantee that over this year, we've made space for the people in our work lives, made room for their different work styles, welcomed their families into the office. And that's great. So as we head back maybe into more familiar territory, a key piece of inclusivity and building trust as a manager or as a team member is not going back to the old habits and not assuming, and pausing to reflect on what we've learned this past year. And, you can start. Model good boundaries yourself so that your team can. I can't tell you how many organizations I've consulted with who have said, yeah, we have a flexible policy and we're family friendly and blah, blah, blah. And you're all homeschooling, but they're all online at 9 o'clock at night. So they're not modeling good boundaries. So what's the team going to do? I think starting by limiting your team online so that your team can is really helpful. Even if you love to be online, schedule your emails, don't send them. Share, we'll talk about that in a sec. We're going to be a little more vulnerable than usual, and then listening more. Starting with listening is really important. And I think it's time, if you have staff, to ask them the world's most difficult question, which is also one you should be asking yourself right now, which is, what do you want? What do we want? I think that sharing what we want from work and asking questions is really important right now. It's one of the most human and important things we as colleagues and leaders can do. And it's hard. And we assume a lot. Coming back to assumptions, I have to tell you that when I started writing about Zoom fatigue a long time ago, I felt really smug because I was like on top of this trend. And I was getting media requests and I was getting speaking requests, and I felt very smart and prescient. And then one day a friend pointed me to this tweet from a young deaf woman in the UK named Charlotte Hyde. And she tweeted this: if you want to talk about concentration fatigue, or as you all call it, Zoom fatigue, make sure you're talking to disabled people who experience it every day. You're new to this, center our experiences, please. And at first, I was really ashamed. I was ashamed of myself. I was embarrassed by my ignorance because I was truly ignorant. But I tried to take a deep breath and take a step back, and I tried to educate myself. It was not hard. There are all these incredible voices on YouTube and Twitter talking about listening fatigue and concentration fatigue, which is very common and a much discussed problem in the professional hearing impaired community and other disability communities. And I had just not bothered to learn before I started saying, I'm an expert on this stuff. And so, as all of us are also thinking about diversity and inclusion as we build our new world of work, remember the diversity of experience around work and around the pandemic. We're all having experiences that are just unique to us. And I think as colleagues, we have to kind of put up put on our grown-up pants, and ask the tough questions that help us understand how everyone's pandemic is going. And that includes making them anxious. And I don't think it's just, having a brown bag at your company or a town hall. I think it's really making room for conversation. It's really thinking about, what can I share and how can I listen and learn so that we can all create an environment that makes space. Okay, so finally, what's next? I certainly don't have a crystal ball. I know the next 6 months is going to be messy. The next year is going to be messy. Life is messy. Work is messy. Last week, I talked to a bunch of fed up employees who felt completely at the mercy of their boss because she was always in contact with them. She was emailing them, she was texting them, sort of bugging them, had you done this? And I tried to remind them that their boss is human and that she was trying to exert some control over a really uncontrollable situation. And spoiler, that boss was me and the team was mine. So the anxiety, I think, that many managers and teams feel now, we're remote, we can't all be summoned, controlled, rallied around for feedback. We don't know what the heck's going to happen. Might make some of us micromanage, might make some of us check out. It's really, really hard. And if you are feeling like you're a manager and you're never getting any space, your devices are lighting up 24/7, take a step back and think about how you can help change the system. We can all help each other give each other a break. The last thing I want to share is a reflection, with an eye towards what's next and going back maybe to a hybrid office. I want you to think of, there's a great British saying, I used to work in London for a long time, start as you mean to go on. How can you better respect your colleagues' need for power over their pace, place, and space? And what do you need? We're all in this together. You're not alone. You can be a better leader because of your emotions. Good, strong, effective leadership looks different for everyone, and it's not about psychological purity or being perfect. Strong leaders and strong team members understand that their mental health is serious and take it seriously enough to notice it and understand it and management. Change starts with us. So let's start as we mean to go on. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Maura. Very, very powerful stuff. And I think, speaking for myself and for those joining us here, I think you've given us a lot of things to think about and to do some deep self-reflection, across the different pace, place, and space areas in our lives. As we go into our Q&A session, we do have a fair number of questions coming in, and so forgive me as I take a moment to pull up the one that we want to highlight first. And this really goes back to the whole cameras on expectation, if you will, right? So this learner wants to know, how do you strike a balance with having cameras on? Sometimes it's helpful to see another person on the screen. It makes the conversation more personable, but it's totally understandable for that person not wanting to be on camera all the time. So how can you potentially strike a balance where you can still make that personal connection, but respect their boundaries?
Ask. Honestly, I would not put the Zoom in the meeting necessarily or default. I would honestly say, as you're scheduling, would you prefer a phone call or is video okay? I just think it's a question. I think that somehow Zoom became the law of the land when we all went remote because we thought it would preserve connection. And now we understand it's not the end all be all. So I would just ask and start a trend in your office.
I think that's valuable advice. And I think, if anything, we can all probably put that into practice almost immediately following this. So for our next question, I'm actually going to call out to my colleague, Nancy Sanchez-Cesaria, to highlight any questions she's seeing in the chat for Maura.
Great. Thanks, Shannon. Thanks, Maura. Great presentation. We've got lots of questions coming in. I am seeing some themes, Maura. One of the themes seems to be around anxiety about returning to the office. People have gotten used to a routine, maybe at home. It might have even been difficult. It's now set up, and there's a lot of competing priorities, and they're not sure how to handle it, how to communicate that anxiety, maybe what to do about it.
First of all, I want to say, yes, that's right. Of course you're anxious. How could you not be? You have managed in the midst of a millennial crisis to create routine and keep your life going. So congratulations, well done. And now that you're finally achieving some kind of stasis, it's all going to change again. Like, of course you're anxious. But that means that everyone else is anxious too. And I think that there's an opportunity here. I think it would be a crime if we all just pretended. My friend Amelia said, just make the messy bed, right? Yeah. Sweep it under the rug and just go back like we haven't all profoundly changed. You're anxious. Everyone's anxious. It's hard. So how can that become a piece of the work coming back? You know, if you have the power to convene meetings and conversations, talk about it. Don't make it an afterthought. Don't make it a brown bag or a town hall. Like, make that a key piece. How are you feeling about this? Do we need to ease in? Like, what can we do to support each other? I think that that's the only answer, is to say, yeah, we're anxious. We're in this together. How can we help each other?
Great. All right. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Nancy, and thank you, Maura. I do have another question, so we might be sort of going back a little bit. So instead of being more, future thinking of, what happens when we enter the workplace, thinking as a manager, managing a team, as part of this pandemic, it can be difficult to put pressure on team members with wanting to create that anxiety or burnout that we're all sort of dealing with. But how could you sensitively manage the increasing demands that are, being put in place without making your direct reports or those around you feel inadequate or overwhelmed?
That's a really great question. And I've been thinking about this. So I have two things to say. The truth is that in addition to feeling anxious, I think that a lot of us, our jobs have increased, staff has been reduced. So we've been asked to fill roles that we never had to before. A lot of businesses are either scared of going under or extremely busy, right? So you may be actually dealing with business conditions. And then the other thing is that a lot of us, because we don't want to lose our jobs, we're very anxious. And so, yeah, it's all pretty high pressure, and a lot of us are working more. So I actually interviewed Bob Posen a couple of days ago, who was president of Fidelity Investments. It's kind of a legendary investment guy, a professor at MIT, and he's a productivity expert. He has a new book coming out on remote work. I like it. And he said, look, here's the thing. We have to shift away from time and into metrics. So if you're the manager who knows that your team is burnt out, exhausted, anxious, is there a way that you could center around a few deliverables? Look, I know this is a hard time. I need this contract taken care of, this client's, whatever, 3 deliverables. And it's their job to get those deliverables done, whether it's at 3 a.m. or whatever, but at least you're aligned on that and the communication is clear, because then they're not worrying about meeting your expectations and you're not worrying about stressing them out. So I loved that. I thought that was, again, hard, but a possibly good solution.
No, I agree. And I think it's really highlighting prioritizing what needs to happen, not now, but soon. And because just like you and I, we have many other things outside of the key priorities, but if we understand that these are my priorities, that can help the manager sort of make his team members feel less stressed less burnt out because they know these are key and you can probably let the other ones go for a little bit, right?
Right. And it's also like the pat on the back, right? If you meet
Right.
deliverable 2, oh, you did a good job. And then the anxiety goes away. all that spoken, like, goes away.
Sometimes you just need a little bit of a check-in to know you're on the right path, and just knowing you're meeting the mark there can help sort of relieve some of the anxiety. Thank you. That's very powerful. Nancy, I'd like to call out to you to see if we have any other questions to highlight from the chat.
Great, thanks, Shannon. I am seeing a bit of a theme here about technology versus family. And there's some questions around giving priority to technology versus family. What's in front of you on the screen versus what's behind you as you're speaking, and how to find ways to balance how people are spending their time when they're in a home office that has both competing priorities.
If anyone has a good answer on this, I'm all ears. It's my own 3 children.
That's why it's so popular of a question.
My children are feral right now. They are basically, I mean, look, I'm going to tell you, I mean, I'm very open. I actually had a call with the school psychologist at one of my kids' schools yesterday, and he said, look, pick an hour a week for your kid and let them choose what they want to do with you, whether it's shooting hoops or playing Minecraft, and 1 hour, maybe even 30 minutes a week. That's what they need right now. And I was like, really? Just an hour a week? Like maybe even I could do that. And he was like, yeah, really. So I think that it's okay to understand that these are not normal times and that your kids need to also be flexible. And then figure out how you can build a heuristic, you know, that's like, I'm going to give them what they need for an hour and they will know that I care about them. And then they have to give me grace. You know, I've often said to my kids, like, you know, mommy has to work right now. So you're going to have to figure out your day. And I don't know. That's just how it has to be. I don't have an alternative. I have to work. They have to go to school. Sorry.
No, it really goes back to we're all in this together and we're all learning together. And we have time for one more question. And I do know Nancy has a really powerful one that I think, you know, we'd really like to highlight as the last question. So Nancy, could you read that out for us, please?
Thanks, Shannon. Maura, this one I think a lot of people are feeling. How do I deal with the feeling of avoiding my work or just generally feeling checked out?
Well, I mean, that's burnout or it's depression. And you are not alone. You are extremely normal. It's okay. You need to remove the shame from it first and any feelings of catastrophizing, because that's, I think, almost worse. You know, sitting there and not being able to focus and then, oh gosh, I'm not going to be able to do my job. I'm not going to meet my deliverables. I'm going to get fired. We're going to lose our home. You know, I think that that's where the anxiety comes in and really multiplies the effect. So my recommendation is to take it very seriously, to do some work to figure out, am I burnt out or am I really depressed? Because if you're depressed, I would advise clinical help. You know, I'm not an expert on burnout. I know Ellen spoke yesterday, there's a lot of resources, but the key to burnout is getting some space away. You can't work through it. And that's the problem. You don't keep working through it until it goes away. So, you know, it's really sitting back and I think asking yourself some questions and really figuring out, can I build in some space? And maybe then it's time to talk with your manager and say, can we reprioritize? Can we just focus on what has to get done right now? Take away the externals because I'm struggling.
That's great. Thank you. I think that'll help a lot of people.
And I'm sorry.
Yes. No, fantastic advice. Thank you. And we are closing in at the top of the hour. So Maura, my thanks to you for this amazing session. I know I'm seeing a lot of people getting a lot of great tips, tricks, things to put into practice to really help deal with the anxiety that we're all dealing with given the times. And in closing, I just want to say thank you to all of our participants for your active engagement in today's Leader Camp. You will see in the chat pod that we've included a link to our survey. We would like to gather your feedback on the experience. And on behalf of the entire Skillsoft organization, thank you.